You are here on the podcast, Everything But the Bottle. Today we have Alex from 3BR Distillery in New Jersey. Something truly unique. A distillery, let me just tell you, the vibes when you go and make it that you never want to leave. It's super cool. Bring your grandparents there. They might look for a bunker to hide out in, and Alex can fill you in the heritage, the history. But it
Yeah.
is unbelievable experience to go there. I'll share, obviously, on the information page where his distillery is located. Go pick up one of his cool. I believe he has like 50 spirits or something. So listen, you can even bring your pets. They'll find something to drink. And yes, with that, here's Alex. Here's the floor. Let him introduce himself to you. And guys, he got a story. Let's go.
Yeah. Hello everybody. My name is Alex. Alexander Shtanov. So my twin brother and I, we started this distillery. Well, we opened 5 years, or we're coming on 5 years, but the whole distillery is based around my grandfather and what he was doing in the Soviet Union, in the 1980s, which was making alcohol from peas. So we kind of took it upon ourselves to kind of bring a little bit of that to New Jersey. The space itself is completely decorated and decked out like 1980s Soviet inspired. We have like old Soviet cartoons on and um, 50-foot long bar graffiti like the Berlin Wall, big windows looking into production. It's a really like a beautiful, cool space. Huge prohibition posters all along the wall from
Guys,
that time
Alex
period.
is being
Yeah.
humble. He's being humble. It is the most distillery I've stopped in. The experience, you just feel like, oh my god, the KGB are coming. This is a spot you don't want to skip over in New Jersey. It's like this
No, it
humble little storefront, and you're like, am I going to open that door? It's dark inside. And you go in there and you're just transported worlds away. He has
it's
replicated it to
yeah.
the T. Did your grandfather actually help design it? Is he in the U.S.?
So my
Tell me about
grandfather
that.
actually passed. My grandfather passed when I was very little. My brother and I were actually on our way. We were 7 years old. We were on our way to Russia to meet him. He was living over there. After my mom and my grandmother moved, he still stayed back. He had way too good of a government job. He was still working and all of that. And we were on our way to visit him when we were very little, and he actually passed while we were in the plane. So we actually never got to meet him. But we grew up hearing all these stories about how amazing he was. My cousin actually, and it's technically not even his grandfather because it was a remarriage. For my aunt, her father is different than my mom's father, and he basically still like considers my grandfather to be like one of the biggest influences on him, because he was such a like amazing like personality and everything about him. Then my cousin ended up starting a business when he was like 12 or 13 years old, and ended up like being like really successful and everything. And it was a computer server company. So it was like during like the boom of like the internet and everything. He was like out there serving like uh creating websites and like putting them on his servers and everything for people. And so his company grew, and he's like one of the people that was like really inspiring was my grandfather, who like taught him everything, like with like dealing with tools and building things and all of that stuff. And so that's what my grandfather was. He basically was a tinkerer. And so he grew up like right after the war.
50 battles
And
right there. A tinkerer. You got it in you, the genes, okay?
yeah, yeah.
50
So
different spirits. I've never met a distiller that has tinkered with more different variety of ingredients than Alex, okay? You walk in, and
that's
let
it.
me
Yeah,
just
exactly.
for the
Yeah.
crowd that doesn't know what it means to make 50 different recipes, okay? Let me just walk you through,
Yeah.
then we'll get right back what this means. So, you go ahead and you want to make, well, he makes this, it's a pea vodka.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
got it? you got to go ahead and file your recipe with the TTB. You got to file your label with the TTB. You even sometimes have to file your glass size with the TTB. Then you got to do the same thing in state and price posting. So it's not just like going into your home kitchen and saying, hey, as some guys might have seen my video when I took sugar cane and boiled it up and said, I'm going to make rum. It's not that easy. This is like a battle plan. You're going to war with the federal government. You're going to get this
My
recipe approved,
yeah.
and you're going to get the category because not everything has a category. Alex might have some stories to share. You got to make a new category, get approval for the recipe, and get it over. So this is not just an ordinary tinkerer. He got 50 recipes through, and I'm sure he'll share with us some of that.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, funny enough, you say that. I think if I were actually to look at all the things that I've produced, I think it's 80 to 85% of everything I released actually didn't fall into a category and had to be put into a distilled spirit specialty, which is like, the catch-all category for something that doesn't exist yet. And that's pretty much like the mentality of everything. And so like I was saying, my
You share that
grandfather,
experience because I just
yeah,
want the crowd
yeah.
to realize on how difficult or how tedious it is to get this through. Because as much as we talk about it as art, as small craft artists, distilleries, we want
Mhm.
the small artists to be appreciated. That's what we're here for. And this is something truly unique, and he's done it many times, so he probably can explain it fairly decently. And then when you taste this product, you understand the sweat and the stress that went into it. And it's something that's not you never hear because look, if you make the same recipe over and over, and it's like 7 years, 8 years, 9 years, and you don't need to do all of this. So he obviously loves
Sure.
his craft to do it.
I do,
And
yeah.
let's hear that struggle of the craft.
Well, yeah, yeah. So pretty much, what I would say is like, this is the comparison I always make, and actually, I've had people be like, "Oh, I never thought about it that way." A lot of people ask like kind of the difference between breweries and distilleries, and I tell them actually, so breweries is more like baking, and distillers more like cooking. So for me, a lot of times, and exactly, I'm going to explain that, is that, baking is like something that it pisses off a lot of people. You have to be like really exact. There's like exact rules you can do. You can't just all of a sudden replace an entire ingredient. It's going to mess up everything. You have to be like very meticulous. You have to plan everything out and be like very, very specific. While cooking, you can be like, oh, a little bit of this, a little bit of this, a little bit of this, and then you end up with something delicious because it's like, all the spices and everything, and all the different processes. You're ending up with a delicious product in the end. When it comes to brewing and distilling, it's the exact same thing. Brewers have to be so meticulous because the process ends with the fermentation. So they can't risk any kind of infection. They can't risk any kind of, yeast, like, suffering under, certain conditions. Everything needs to be done in the exact same way, and they need to track, the beginning sugars, the end sugars, and know exactly the alcohol percentage, all that stuff. With a distiller, we're a little more lax. The fermentation, while still being, very important, is, I can have it run hot. I don't care. There's still some
Tell me about it.
control on there's some control on our end. So while I try to maintain, really good yeast health for all of mine. The point being is that a distiller really doesn't have to do that. There's plenty of yeast that run really hot and hard and get your product done in a couple of days. And then they technically say that like even for a whiskey, like 80% of the flavor is the barrel itself.
Don't
So
tell
it's like
that to anyone. You're killing our
I
craft.
no, so I don't agree with that. I do think that there is a lot more to the first parts, and for me actually, and it's something that I talk to a lot of distillers, and they're usually like really like surprised that I do this. It's like I'm really on top of my distillation, especially my second distillation. My stripping run, I don't really care that much about. It's just
Here,
going in the
Alex, let me just
background.
explain this to
Mhm.
some people. When you distill, you might distill once or twice, and then you really after two distills, there's no real purpose. So the first
Yeah,
time you distill, you
unless you're
get your
Irish.
a lower a lower proof, and then we'll have some of the notes or some of the off flavors. You'll distill it again, and it will be pure. For marketing purposes, you'll see vodka that says distilled 7 times. The guy who counted 7 times, he must have drank something. After
Exactly,
two, it's
exactly.
pretty much a waste of time.
Yeah, and I
Maybe
mean
I'm
that's
wrong.
usually.
Feel free to
Yeah.
disagree.
No, no, I tell everybody that. So actually, the fun part about the whole distilled 7 times or whatever, 8 times, 10 times, it doesn't mean anything. So if you see like it's usually the really cheap vodka that says like a distill a certain amount of times. The other vodka doesn't have to say that because it's the quality that does all the speaking to it. It's the the bottom shelf $10 vodka that's usually like distilled 18 times and filtered through whatever. Because they're trying to convince you it's marketing. In reality, vodka needs to be distilled to 95%. However you get there, you get there. You can technically get away with, like um like 8 plates or something like that and produce 95% spirit, which is legally required to make a vodka. You need to distill to 95%. The
So
problem is the
explain
more yes. What was that?
explain what you mean by plates. It's not your dinner
Yes.
plates. I know we're talking baking
Yes,
and cooking,
exactly.
but not your dinner plates.
Yeah, so basically, if you've ever seen like a vodka distillery, like a picture or anything, it usually has a still that like here's like the main part of a still, and then it usually has these really tall columns that go next to it. Those columns are interesting because they're not a solid piece. They're not just filled with something. They're not just hollow. They have basically separations. And so the way I describe it is that every single one, and they're usually like there's a window. Um, the windows aren't required. They don't actually do anything, but they allow you to see what's happening inside. So I like the windows. But basically, the windows usually show you where the chamber is. And so every single chamber in the still is usually marked by a window. Um, and what those chambers do basically is there's a floor and a ceiling to the chamber, but obviously not closed off. The vapor needs to travel through and up and out of it. But basically the way it's set up is that the vapor can travel more easily up than it can down. Because obviously there's pressure coming up with all of the vapor coming up, right? And the way that the plate is usually designed, and I call it a plate because it's a solid piece usually with holes in it. Um, is that yeah, it allows the liquid to basically accumulate on that layer, and what happens is that the vapor coming up is actually hotter than the boiling point of that liquid because it has been already distilled, and so it's closer to pure alcohol, and so that vapor is now causing this liquid to bubble and evaporate and distill again. And so usually like you would talk about and this is like more specific to vodka stills or like even short column stills because they'll still have those chambers. They talk about how many plates it has. So a lot of bourbon in Kentucky actually is a short column still. So they'll still run it through a plated system. It's not pot distilled. The ones that are pot distilled usually very proudly say pot distilled on them, but they're not nearly as efficient as a column still. You'll get a slightly higher yield and you have a little bit more control in a column still. So no matter what I'm distilling, even if I'm doing a pot distillation, I still have the ability because there's an additional thing called a deflagmator, or I call it a precondenser because I think it's a little less of a
Twisted word.
like a specialized term that makes it like outside the normal person's understanding, because what a condenser does is it condenses the vapor back into a liquid. A precondenser still does that, but still wants the vapor to pass through in the end. So basically, it is still a chamber at the height of your column or your pot still or whatever that you're running a certain temperature of liquid through, or a particular rate, and that's slowing down enough or not enough to basically create like a slight difference in how you're distilling it. I am a huge fan of these things. No matter what I'm distilling, I never ever just leave it as just a pot still with no kind of interference. I think it does make a huge difference because when I'm distilling and I'm tasting it off the end, I want it to taste good the entire time, right? There's a thought process that it's the culmination of everything, and you need some of the maybe bad tasting stuff, and altogether, it creates like a particular product that is your
Are
like
you referring to
signature.
the people that throw the heads back in?
No, no, I'm talking about in general. There's so many distilleries I talk to that they're like, oh yeah, while I'm doing a distillation, I just walk away. Even the finishing run, they put it into the still. They're not doing any kind of adjustments to it, right? And they're distilling it, and they're like, all right, it's the heads, the hearts, and then the tails, and then they're just deciding where to cut it. For me, I'm a lot more meticulous, right? When I put it into the still and I'm distilling, I have the pre-condenser on. I'm controlling the exact flow rate between, I mean, the temperature between the everything. And so I'm trying to get actually the heads part to almost come out at like as close to 95% as possible, because then it's at least as concentrated as possible with that. And that's my mentality, right? You can argue with that, but in the end, it all gets kind of blended together, because as much as you want to remove all the bad stuff, it's gonna kind of be blended throughout the whole process. But I try to at least concentrate as much as I can, and then throughout the run, right, I might turn off the pre-condenser at some point and have everything come through. But as soon as it starts tasting bad, I make a judgment call, right? If it's a little bitter, if it's a little, whatever, I'll start making adjustments, right? I'll either lower the heat, turn on the pre-condenser a little bit more and more, and then my goal is to have it taste really good the entire way through. And so I do think that that makes a huge difference, and it's also like it's a
No
little
question.
signature. Your distillery is producing something, even if it's going in a barrel, right? And they say that the barrel does so much of that flavor and everything.
Stop it.
I think that, no matter what, if you don't like it before it goes into the barrel, it's probably not going to be good after the barrel, right? The barrel can only do so much. So I want it to basically have a really good tasting white dog, right? If I'm making whiskey, but if I'm making anything, the case is still the same. I want it to taste really good, and so I have a lot more control over that than it seems like a lot of people. And not to throw shade, because every single person has their own signature, and it could be their signature, that they don't do anything, right? I personally just I love the fact that I can have so much effect over it. And that it really is like a piece of me, right? Every single bottle that I release is something that I've tasted literally all the way through, and
Completely
it's a
agree with that.
yeah, yeah,
Look, guys, this is why craft distilling is where you need to stop by. As opposed to running a massive digital operation with screens blinking and stuff and having no idea what you're producing except dollars, because that is your end goal, to squeeze out of the corn every single drop of dollar that you could. A true craftsman like Alex, an artist, he's babysitting it, okay? He's watching it throughout the process. You're going to have a much more fine tuned spirit to look, to give the personality of the spot over. Now, it doesn't mean you have to agree with the flavor uh, taste profile. That's again, every person tastes has different tastes, different flavors. That's perfectly understandable. But when you pick up a bottle and you look at it and say, "Hey, this is a 3BR vodka. This is a 3BR bourbon," and you're like, "This was what," you'll appreciate the consistency in that taste throughout, and the arts and the craftsmanship that goes into it, and that's something you cannot get from any other distiller. Just in one more case in point, often when you speak to a master distiller from a big place, the master distiller doesn't even know where the whiskey still is. I'm not, not knocking. They do the
yeah, yeah.
shows. They may design the recipe, but those dial turns, they don't know where the ladder is to turn the dial. That's not what they're doing. Alex is literally there with the dials, like he's describing, looking through that glass. And this is very important because temperatures have an effect. There's all different effects
Yeah,
that play a very
exactly.
important role.
Exactly. When it's starting to come off a little bitter, right? I'm thinking to myself, is the temperature of the still a little too hot? Is it possibly burning, all those flavors, and all that stuff, especially if I have the reflux a little too high, right? Because it takes a little more effort to get it through that. And a reflux being the just to describe it, reflux being the basically the measure of how much I'm slowing down with the pre-condenser, the vapors, right? So I can be like, maybe I'm slowing it down a little too much. It's burning a little bit, and that's where the bitterness is coming from, right? And so I'll lower the reflux. I'll lower that pre-condenser speed, and I'll allow a little bit. of a faster, come through. And there is a huge difference. Like there is, like I will taste it and be like, yes, it's a little less bitter now. There is something that I have that control. I have that flavor. And what you were saying as to this is like, yes, you may not agree with my flavor profile, right? And this is the problem with, in my opinion, with some distilleries, right? Um, and especially like a lot of the bigger guys, they're trying to reach a flavor profile that is ubiquitous, right? That's something that every single person, no matter where they're going to be, is going to try it and be like, this is good. That's not like a thing. That's not possible. Everyone has a slightly different palate. So the best thing you can do, unless you have a terrible palate, is to make something that you like, right? If you drink like, milk with lemons, I really don't like. I mean, you probably shouldn't be making whiskey, but I mean, um, but like if you trust in your taste, if if you typically are the kind of person that makes, a good cocktail or cooks good food, and you have that you know, that taste aspect where you can taste something and be like, oh, this needs a little bit of this or needs a little of that. You just gotta trust yourself, because what you're making is going to be good for you, and chances are, if it's good for you, it's probably going to be good for a lot of other people. And so that's the mentality you should have. By trying to appease everybody, you're gonna appease like, you might appease everybody, but no one's gonna be like, this is my favorite thing ever. That, and that's the problem, is that you're shooting for an average, and average is never anyone's favorite. Average is right in the middle. And so, yeah, do you want a whiskey, or a rum or whatever, that everyone's like, it's okay, we'll use it because it's here, or do you want someone to be like, holy crap, this is the best thing I've ever had, and now, and I've heard this so many times, especially like my vodka. So my vodka is 100% made out of peas. It is so different from any other vodka.
Oh,
It is almost like tequila like. It's a vegetal, it's earthy. And I have so many people that tell me like, I was not a vodka person. And then I try your vodka, and now I'm like, vodka can be like this? Right? And the vodka is different. It's very different, right? I can't go to somebody who enjoys, let's say, like Tito's, right? And that's their favorite thing that they've ever had, and they'll try my vodka and be like, this is not Tito's, so it's probably not gonna be their favorite. But the chances of me finding people that absolutely, like, normally despise vodka, but try my vodka and is like, oh, this is so different. I actually like this. I have so many people telling me that, like, they actually drink my vodka on the rock, right? That is a weird thing, right? It's like, before I opened this distillery, before I had made that first batch of the final product of what our Mendel peat-based vodka is, I didn't think that was a thing. I thought that, maybe you had a problem or something if you were drinking vodka on its own, right? But you kind of learn to understand that, like, there's so much that could be, done with the craft, that, my vodka being so different actually kind of tastes like, almost a different kind of spirit, even though it's a vodka. And so on the rock, like, you're appreciating all the nuance, all the flavor, and it is a thing. And yeah, I have a bunch of those people that come and, love my vodka. They'll put it in cocktails too, but they're like, even just on its own. Um, that's not something you're gonna get if you're gonna shoot for like a balanced, average palate. You're gonna get, exactly that. You're gonna get people that are gonna be like, all right, I need to fill my liquor cabinet. They're not gonna be like, oh, I need my next bottle, you know, uh, it's my special treat or whatever. You're not gonna get that. So that's my mentality, and that's, you were alluding to before with all the special things I produce. So with 50 something products, actually, I for me, again, this is a fun thing for me to do, because there is a monotony, right, in making the same thing over and over and over and over again, right? There's a point where you're gonna maybe lose a little bit of, yeah, exactly, lose a little bit of your soul, and wanna maybe, end it all. But with the fact that I have this ability, right? I have a really nice setup, I can do any kind of spirit, right? I have a vodka still, but
You
it's a
need to
hybrid
see
where I can
Alex's
still
place. You need to
I
go
can
and see it.
yeah.
Okay.
I can still run it as a pot still. I can run it as a short column. I have this capability. So from the very beginning, I was like, I'm gonna do, you know, I'm gonna do the fun things. I'm gonna do whatever I want. And every time I have one of these fancy, stupid, sometimes stupid ideas, I'm just like, you know
Or
what?
or
I
oversized
can.
apples.
Yeah. I mean, I can absolutely do this. And I basically, so my grandfather, get slightly back there, and I'm gonna just expedite this. He was basically he didn't like go to college. He didn't even finish high school, but he was a tinker. He was always building things, and he ended up getting recruited by the government because he built a bunch of illegal stuff, and they were like, "We can either arrest you or we can recruit you." And I was like, and hearing this, I was like, this guy's super cool. I like this guy. Um, he's this like rebel at heart. But he ended up becoming the head elevator engineer for the whole Soviet Union. So he traveled all across the country, did a whole bunch of really cool like projects. Like he did the Roscosmos, like the literally like where all the rockets launched, where he worked on those elevators, a bunch of top secret like um underground like city elevators and everything, like because those exist even in the US, so they're underground cities. That's not even like a thing, that's those are like the bunkers and everything. So he did all of those, he did everything. And he was an elevator engineer. So I was like, when I was talking to my business partner, especially my marketing person, who I'm usually not, she's not the biggest fan of me because I give her so much work because of all of my project. She's like one of my closest friends, but she's constantly complaining. Um, she basically like told me, we're like, how are we gonna tie this back into this brand? This brand is very clearly, about your grandfather, about like, Soviet Union, about like, this time period, all this stuff. And I was like, okay, well, my grandfather was an elevator engineer. What if we imagine infinitely tall building with every single floor being a different ingredient, right? Or a different concept, right? It doesn't even have to be an ingredient, it can be a concept. And so I try to do four a year, but sometimes it's three. So roughly every 3 to 4 months, I put out something really weird and really cool. And a lot of times it's because farmers reach out and they say, I have a whole lot of something or whatever. And the very first one I did, I was at a farmer's market and I tried possibly the best maple syrup I've ever tried. It was so significant, like of an experience, that I was like, I wonder what happens if you ferment and distill this. And so this farmer, he actually is like one of the bigger farmers in his maple trees are everything in Pennsylvania. I bought from
That's good.
him, and again, he's just like a singular farmer, 55 gallons of grade A maple syrup. Cost me an
Guys,
arm and a leg.
yeah,
Arm and a
that's
leg.
Alex
I would
price.
never make this again, purely on the price. The product itself was delicious. It was super cool. But like this ended up being, the first, elevator spirit is what they're calling. So we imagine the lobby was at level one, and so the very first elevator spirit was level two. And so it was 002 Maple. And we had a completely different artist and a completely different style make the artwork, and that basically stuck for us. Every single one of these floors is a completely different artist, and all they have to do is incorporate the ingredients somehow, and then but in completely their own art style, right? And so now we're actually up to 16. So we've done 15 of these things. So every so often I produce one of these. I have my next one coming out very soon, but I've done
What is it? Can we
fermented
ask?
distilled basic. What was that?
Can we ask what it is? Can you spill the
Yeah, I'll
beans?
I'll, t- I'll tell you in a second. Yeah. Um, but I did like a ginger spirit because Rutgers University reached out and said, we have hundreds of pounds of ginger grown in your county. It's like grown in New Jersey, ginger. It's weird. But they were basically like, oh, you can have it if you want it. And so I made an alcoholic ginger beer that I then distilled into a spirit, and that was our second one. So it was a ginger spirit. Then I did this one was actually probably the most like chefy one that I did. Oh, well, one of the most chefy ones. I did a dandelion amaro. So with that one, it was we picked 100 pounds of dandelion flowers, made a dandelion wine, distilled it, bittered it with dandelion root, and then sweetened it with the entire U.S. supply of dandelion honey. So it was like dandelion three ways. It was super cool. It had like such a cool flavor profile too. Huge pain, right? I don't know if I'll ever make it again because 100 pounds of just the flowers, right? Those things weigh nothing. We had, groups of people out there, in this field picking flowers for us. So it was a huge pain, but it is also it's just so cool, and I can do stuff like that. Uh, New Jersey is also really known for tomatoes. So the next one I did was actually a fermented distilled tomato spirit. So 2,500 pounds of tomatoes. Also, again, cost me a bit. And in the end, because I didn't want to add any sugar, I wanted just the stuff from the tomatoes to come through. It ended up producing only 5 gallons of alcohol.
Guys, so just to break it down, when
So
you
bad.
ferment, you need sugar. Sugar is what
Hmm.
makes alcohol. Apparently, the tomatoes do not have enough fermentable sugars in them to create much tomato spirit.
I
But
think
Alex
I
doesn't cut
think
corners.
yeah. Yeah, yeah. So that was the thing is like I decided at that point I was like, I wanted to make it purely tomato. I got all these tomatoes, they're like beautiful Jersey tomatoes, and I fermented, distilled it. I can't say that, there wasn't like like there probably was the ability to get more out of it, but I distill the taste. I'm not trying to distill between a certain percentage point like some people do. They're like, all right, between 80 and like 55 or whatever, and they'll just collect it blindly. I was distilling the taste, and one of the things is and this is actually one of those things. You would think, right? Being in the United States, we have all these oranges and stuff like that. Why is no one doing a fermented orange spirit, right? I I was thinking about this and I was
Great, I
like
forgot my mic was off. Great,
and
great. Real brandy. Break it down for everyone. Educate them.
yeah,
This is something so
yeah.
delicious.
Yeah, and I was like, all right, why? The issue is the citric acid. Citric acid just basically like while the ferment might go well, right? You can balance it out and whatever. There's just an off flavor that comes from it, right? And so when you're distilling this product, you're just gonna get like way lower yields than you're supposed to get. And so it basically removes the entire viability, even if there's a ton of sugar in the oranges, of producing. And very similar with the tomatoes. Tomatoes also have a high amount of the citric acid in them. And so that was one of the problems. As I was distilling a taste. I had a way larger portion of the heads, the part that I removed, because I just couldn't get it to the point where it tasted the way that I wanted it to taste. And that's an issue for me because I'm very much like I want to be a part of that flavor and the flavor that I get from it. And so that's the sad truth. I ended up getting 5 gallons at 40%, and I at that point I had to make a decision, right? I needed to recoup some costs. So I kept a bottle for myself of the tomato brandy itself, but I was like, all right, let's kind of like still stay within this realm of tomato. And I decided to make a tomato liqueur. So I reincorporated some of the stillage from the tomato. So that's basically all the stuff left over after the first distillation. I mean, technically the second distillation too, but the second distillation will have less flavor. The first distillation basically is still those same tomatoes that you ferment and distill. So it's still the same original raw material. I reincorporated that along with sugar into the tomato brandy. And what I got was this like, it basically tasted like biting into the sweetest tomato that you've ever had. And it was delicious. It was one of my favorite things I ever made. But obviously, with 5 gallons of alcohol, I can only go so far. So that was 100 in total. That whole batch ended up producing 100 375 bottles of tomato liqueur. Um, and I did recoup my costs. But we also are super against overcharging here. So I think even though I probably should have charged like over $100 for that bottle because of how significant and special it was, I think we topped it off at $40. We still wanted to make some money and knew that we were going to make a little bit more money on the cocktails made from it. But we also just wanted it out there. We wanted someone to buy a bottle and be like, "Wow, this is made from New Jersey tomatoes," and just like have it on their bar and like take a sip every so often. Not necessarily try to use it in a cocktail or anything. Just enjoy it on its own. Um, but that's basically been the theme with everything that I've been doing. I ended up making a traditional Korean soju that is so traditionally made that it's being distributed to Korean Michelin star restaurants. I worked with a Korean rice wine sommelier. I imported rice from Korea, and everything. I did everything exactly the way that you would to make a real soju, not the green bottle soju, but like the soju that was pre-Korean War. That is like super authentic to the history of Korea. I did that, and it's amazing, and I still make it to this day. It's one of the rare cases where I continue to make a product, even though it's supposed to be a one-off. I continue to make it because I was like, I got basically accepted as like a very authentic version of a spirit. I might as well keep making it so that this lives on in the world. Um, but usually with a lot of these things, I don't make them again. The plan is basically either they're way too expensive or way too complicated. I did one with peaches, and it was 2,000 pounds of peaches, and I didn't want the pit or anything else in it, so it took 11 hours between my brother, me. I got my mom involved and my girlfriend, and one of the five of us basically sitting there cutting the peaches in half, splitting them, removing the pit, quartering them, throwing them in a blender, blending that, and then putting it into the mash tun. And getting all of that together took took 11 hours. It's a labor of love at this point. That's not something I could ever recover from. Um, and I do it purely because I'm like, I want to do this, and it was a peach and basil spirit. I basically incorporated basil grown by Rutgers University. So once the peach brandy was made, I redistilled basil in with the peach brandy to produce this like really lovely like spirit where you get peach, then basil, and then back to peach, and is like I think by far one of the technic like most technically hard spirits I've ever produced because I really needed to nail that flavor. And I did it very slowly by incorporating the basil distillation, like 1 gallon at a time and adding it back to the batch. Another gallon at a time, adding it back to the batch. And I basically got it to that point where it tasted exactly the way I wanted it to, and I stopped. Um, it's not it's that's something that I can't do as like a regular spirit, right? This is something that's special and fun, and it keeps me excited, and it also allows this opportunity now because I've met and know so many farmers that they actually reach out to me and they're like, I have a ton of this ingredient, you want to do something with it? And I have so many cool opportunities, and usually my first thought process is like, what can I do weird with it, right? What hasn't been done, and that's the mentality, and that's how I've gotten to 50 spirits, and they're not all obviously available at once. Once one of those special ones is sold out, it's sold out. At one particular time I have about 17, and those are a lot of my regular spirits that are always made, and then usually one or two of these special ones, and those batches, they sell out. They're not huge. They're like between 100, well, with the smaller case, 100 to all the way to 250 bottles of this particular special thing. And while you were there, you actually grabbed a bottle of the Applejack, and that was something special too. That was one of my more recent ones. Basically, it was Rutgers reached out and said we have like 1,000+ pounds of apples that we basically throw away because once we do our experiments, we need this tree to produce fruit so that we can test the apple, but we only need one apple, right? It is extremely wasteful because the other 99% of this tree, because it's still producing a ton of apples, is just throwaway. They collect it because they have the machine, they do everything, but they usually try to give it away and like give it to food banks and everything, but most of the time it ends up just going to waste. And they reached out to me and they're like, do you want to do something with it? And I was like, yeah, absolutely, this sounds cool. And I ended up making an Applejack, which is an apple brandy. I just like I like calling it an Applejack because it is a reference to literally DSP Distillery number one, Laird's. They're not the ones that invented Applejack, but they're known for it. Applejack was one of America's first spirits before whiskey, before anything. And I traditionally they were actually doing freeze distillation, which is absolutely not good. So that's been completely cut out of the picture. But basically, the idea is, they would make a bunch of apple cider and then leave it out during winter. It would freeze, and what would freeze would be the water, not the alcohol. And then they would drain out all the actual liquid left over. And this whole process basically froze just the water, and the alcohol and some of the apple flavor remained. And so that's what they would drink, and they would call Applejack. Um, that doesn't remove the methanol, doesn't remove the acetone, the acetaldehyde, any of the stuff that you would want to remove during the heads portion. So it's not necessarily a safe way, and I don't recommend anyone do that. But it is still, historical, and they were calling it Applejack. And Laird's, continued, and they've been distilling it for since I want to say it was like early 1800s, basically. Because there's records of George Washington drinking Laird's. Um, I wanted to reference that, and they're good people, the Laird's people. I've talked to them. I'm friendly with them. And I told them right away. I'm like, hey, I'm making this. I'm not trying to steal your business. I just want to put out my own version of it, as a little like nod to how significant the spirit is in general. So that was the most recent. Well, that was the second most recent one. After that, I released a Tarragon Absinthe. That came out like 3 4 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, I think. And that was basically I wanted to see what an absinthe would be like without anise, and instead replacing the anise with tarragon, which is a lot more palatable to a lot more people, and also a lot more Soviet. One of the most popular sodas from the Soviet Union was actually a soda made from tarragon. So I kind of was like, this is a cool opportunity. I had made it in like a really small batch, like one bottle before, just to test it out, and I really liked the taste of it. But I decided to kind of lean into it. I was like, I'm gonna make a whole batch of this. I ended up getting a bunch of grape musts from a winery, and basically making a grappa from it. And I had just released a different grappa very recently before that. So I was like, you know what? I'm gonna use this grappa base to um to make something else. And so I decided to lean into the fact that a lot of absinthe is now made with grape with like a grape spirit or like a brandy or a eau de vie, and use that grappa base to then redistill with tarragon, wormwood, and fennel, instead of the anise wormwood and fennel. And then I threw it in a barrel for a year because it was too soon to release. And at that point, I kept thinking, I was like, what can I continue to do to this to make this like even more special? One of There happens to be a style of absinthe called red absinthe that you don't see very often. So instead of green, colored with usually like herbs and stuff like that, it's colored red with hibiscus. Um, and what's nice about that is that it's also providing floral notes, it's providing a little acidity. So it is in a lot of people's opinion like a way more palatable version of an absinthe. And also for our Soviet theme, red, I was like, that sounds awesome. Um, so I went with the red absinthe, and I used the hibiscus, but I also added a little cochineal because I wanted to stay red. The problem is with red coloring is that it's very unstable,
Very
and
important.
anything, and I learned this the hard way. One of my products is a gin that I color with beets because it's a savory gin, and I want it to be almost like akin to like almost like a borscht. Um, and I colored it with beets, and it's such a beautiful red color, but that color fades after 2 weeks. It is not stable. It is very reactive to air. It's reactive to light, um, and that's almost everything. Hibiscus also apparently is not a stable red. The only stable red is the made from the cochineal beetle, and it's been used since like 300 BC. So it's like for a while, and it is one of those things where a lot of people I talk to, they don't realize just how many things it's in. Red Skittles are colored with it. Campari was originally colored with it, and they're actually making a comeback to it, because especially with the ban now of like red dye number 40 and all those different the artificial dyes, because those are stable. Those are being banned because they're just chemicals. They're not they're not necessarily safe, especially in like large quantities. So I wanted to incorporate that cochineal to keep my red absinthe actually red, especially after a couple of weeks. I was like, I would hate to buy something called red anything and have it turn brown, immediately. So I stuck with the hibiscus, for the flavor profile for the initial color, but I added the cochineal as well. Um, and then you were asking what my next one was. My next one is a little less exciting, but I just really want to do a really good version of the spirit because I really have not encountered too many. I am putting out a blackstrap blackstrap rum. Blackstrap rum, it, like typically has like you would know it as like almost the pitch black, rum. Uh, Cruisin' has one. I want to say like Gosling's has one. A lot of these like major brands that produce a ton of stuff and not necessarily the highest level of like craft. I wanted to put out my own version of it. And obviously I have my own twist on it. Everything I do has a slight twist on it. So I actually used panela as the sugar source. I can't hear
I didn't
you.
mean
I
to
don't
stop
know.
for 1 minute because my kid is making some noise. He'll be here for it.
But yes,
Keep it talking. Just my mic's gonna go off
yeah.
for a second.
But yeah, all good, all good. Sorry, I'm just like rambling. So but any case, yeah, I use panela, which is actually a newer thing in terms of like rum distillation and everything. Panela is basically one of the earlier stages of sugar refinement. So it actually has a ton of that like like the sugar cane itself flavor while still having a little bit of almost like caramelization that comes with the refinement process. So it falls somewhere between like really early molasses, like the lighter molasses, and like sugarcane juice. And I thought of it as a really cool opportunity to get a lot of flavor in the actual base rum. And then my idea is it's not going to be black. Like my blackstrap rum isn't going to be black. It's going to be back sweetened with the blackstrap molasses itself to make it a blackstrap rum. But normally like that can only add so much flavor because you're not adding like, an equivalent amount of this black to, clear spirit. You're adding a little bit. Normally a lot of these distillers for their blackstrap rum, this is like 100% of the time they'll add, additional coloring to make it black. I just want to avoid that. I want to make it a blackstrap rum purely on the concept of how it's made, the fact that it's back sweetened the blackstrap, but also really put a lot of effort into that original fermentation on the panela side. And so I'm hoping for a really it's currently fermenting. I'm going to distill it a little later this week. I'm really hoping for a really flavorful, slightly sweet, slightly like uh having a little bit of like that those baking spice notes from like the blackstrap rum, but still have like the complexity of like a really high end rum made from panela. So kind of still my own hybrid, but with the concept that I'm still following the rules as as much as I can, even though they're very loosely defined in the first place. So that's my next one, and then I have a couple of really other cool ones coming out later in the year, and I'll let everybody just follow the distillery and hear what those are later on.
So, fill us in, Alex. With what was the most difficult part, or your biggest flop, and how's the government treating you? New Jersey got some quirky laws. I
Yeah,
believe you can't do direct to consumer shipping, unlike New York. But
yeah,
you could obviously distill fruit, unless I'm bringing up something we don't want to discuss, which in New York a
no,
distillery
no,
can't. Separate
yeah,
approvals. So talk about that limitations. How the government got to shape themselves up. Both look, we're not here to get you in trouble. So New Jersey guys
no,
are
no.
speaking to New Jersey regulators. You guys are awesome. That said, let's hear from Alex what we could use improvement on in New Jersey, and the federal level.
Yeah, so I mean, New Jersey itself tends to be a little bit more difficult on the tasting room side. It doesn't really limit too much on the actual production side. Um, a tasting room, we have a ton of laws. Like we're not allowed to serve other people's spirits. We're not allowed to serve wine, beer.
That means
We're
there's
not
no
like
beer.
we're not. What was
There's no
that?
beer. There's no beer or anything. It's just what you distill.
It's just things that we distill, yeah. No food as well. That one's really big too. I mean, I know New York, distillers can usually, and they're actually, I think, required to have some kind of a food, right?
Yeah,
From a legal
pretzels,
standpoint,
I
right?
believe, or something. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. We can just have little snacks. That's all we're legally allowed to do. If there's any kind of food involved, like like people can bring food in, but there's no way that we can legally make money on food. We have to, basically, if we ever do decide to like provide something, it needs to be just free and for everybody, kind of thing.
So they
So,
should. So if you see a distillery in New Jersey charging like $200 for a drink and a steak free, now you'll understand.
yeah. But my a lot of my problems have more so been with the federal government. One particular example, so one of my elevator spirits, well, it never happened. I was so excited for. I decided to I'm a huge fan of the amaros and like the bitter liqueurs and almost like the more bitter the better. Like it is it's like I'm a huge fan of it. I started talking to some mushroom growers. Um and they were we were talking about reishi mushroom and they were telling me about how there's like all these different varieties of reishi that are like you can grow like that they grow and they sell for like medicinal purposes and tinctures and other things. And reishi mushroom is like famously very bitter. So I was like, oh, let me make an amaro centered entirely around reishi mushroom, um, as the bittering
Guys, just
agent.
pay attention. Alex is making this sound very easy. He's a true artist of this craft because none of this is easy. He's making it sound easy. You go online and Google recipe for this for whiskey. I doubt, or for a spirit. I doubt you'll find anything. Okay, it's
Yeah.
not like
Well,
baking
well, so
cookies. You'll find a
there's
hundred options.
Yeah. Well, there's a reason. This is the, I mean, it's like my one of my biggest flops. I decided to make this around reishi mushroom, right? And immediately so one of the things that you have to always look for if you're trying to use like an unknown ingredient, like or unused before ingredient, is something called the grassless, and it's generally regarded as safe. So GRAS, grassless. Uh, and on this, the FDA pretty much lists every single ingredient that's ever been approved for use in food and alcohol and everything. Um, and I knew that reishi mushroom was approved on this grass list because I've seen it in a ton of different foods, and like I said, they've been using it pretty much like medicinally in Asia for like thousands of years. Um, and so I decided to do this. I approached a bunch of other farmers. I ended up getting local, like
No,
really
approach
amazing.
farmers. He's good with them.
Yeah,
He's good friends with the farmers. This guy,
yeah,
this
yeah.
guy's popular. They charge
They
him a
love me.
couple
They love me.
babus. Oh well, you listen. Anyone that kicks back a couple babus, they get a love.
Um, but any case, they were like, "Oh, do you want like I ended up finding like a hazelnut farmer, and the hazelnuts were amazing. I basically because I wanted to add more to the bitterness and the complexity, so I basically took a bunch of time to with a blowtorch and like on a stovetop roast the hazelnuts because I wanted almost like that burnt skin on the hazelnut to add additional complexity. So I did that. Then I found while technically not grown in New Jersey, cacao um, from South America and Central America. Um, there is a processor in New Jersey who gets the raw cacao, and they're an organic producer of chocolates. And I worked with him, and he was able to get me a large amount of this like really amazing cacao. And so my idea was almost kind of like a funky Ferrero Rocher with the chocolate, hazelnut, and the mushroom. Kind of giving it that complexity because mushroom and chocolate are actually something that a lot of like chefs do a lot is that pairing is really nice. And so that was my concept, and I made that the small batch to test it out. Got it to a point where it's perfect. I love it. It's amazing. Um, and then after that, only after that can you really submit the recipe. Because I mean you don't know what you're submitting if you submit it before then. and I submitted the recipe, and it was the longest period of time I've ever seen the formulas, the TTB, spend on reviewing the recipe. It was a really long time, and then eventually, after weeks, I got a kickback that says talk to the FDA. And I reached out to the FDA, and they're like, "Oh, yeah, reishi mushroom, is on the grass list, but not for alcohol." And I was
Let's
like,
just be clear.
"Why?"
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah,
explain why. We don't usually work with the FDA or the health department. So this, the minute
at
this
all. Yes.
happens, if there's red flags.
Yes, I immediately was like, "Oh no." Um, and that's happened one other time with me, but the other time I resolved it. But this time around, I was basically like, okay, why is it not like if it's on the grass list for food, why is it not on the grass list for alcohol? And they were like, well, there's a compound, someone did, a study. There's a compound in the reishi mushroom that when extracted with alcohol, is very dangerous for pregnant women and children.
Also known
I
as
was like,
alcohol.
what? Yeah,
Also known as
people who shouldn't be consuming alcohol, but they're like, no, you technically can't discriminate. You know, uh, you know,
Except, please read the warning label on the back of every bottle of alcohol. Well, you shouldn't discriminate. This is
you literally can't make this up. Like they literally were like, yeah, you can't discriminate against pregnant women just because they shouldn't drink. That means they can't. That doesn't mean they can't drink. And I was like, okay, but the alcohol also is harmful. Like it's like that they're like, oh, but you're increasing the harm. And I was like, are you kidding me? And so after already admitting like this small batch just to get the recipe correct. I'm now like and I had like a release date and everything. I told a bunch of people that the spirit was coming out, and they were all excited about it. Yeah, now I'm like,
do
okay,
not
well, I
ask
guess
what
I can't
happened to
release
that
anything.
spirit. Okay, but let's just say that this spirit by Alex was disposed of properly. Never tasted by
Exactly.
anyone.
That's exactly what happened. But that's the stupidity in all this, and that's also the nature as well of like what I'm doing. A lot of times I'm doing things I've never been done before, using certain ingredients that people are reaching out to me and telling me to try to use. I don't I like I'm putting in a lot of risk on my end because a lot of times I have to make it before I can even do anything to like test it out and figure out if it's viable before even submitting anything to the government. And the farmer's not going to be like, "All right, yeah, I'll pay you back," you know. So
No
so
one's
there's
paying
there's
you
there's
back. Not only is no one paying you back, people that might pre-order
exa-
because sometimes you'll sell on pre-orders, they won't believe you what happened, and they're gonna be livid at you and could possibly even
yeah,
badmouth your distillery. I mean, these are all
exactly.
nightmares that craftsmen have to face.
But that's been my experience with like experimentation and everything. And that's how we got to 50. And I'm not planning on stopping that. And we're approaching our 5-year anniversary in April, so 50 something spirits in 5 years. That's pretty crazy, I gotta say. Those are not rookie numbers.
No, they're not, Alex. Give everyone your address. We're running up to the hour. Um,
Yeah,
how
yeah,
to
yeah.
stop by? Be in touch. Let's get everyone. The fifth anniversary is coming. Let's make this place that most hopping popping place in New Jersey. And a side note, everyone. If you make it popular, the government works with you. So if you want something truly unique done, you need to show Alex, show up, show your support because that's not how government moves. Because at the end of the day, for them, it's about the vote. And if I can add the dollar. But anyways,
Well, we're as you said, we're right on the Jersey Shore. We're like the northern part of the shore, Keyport, New Jersey. It is like you said, it is a beautiful space. We also are very much known for our cocktails. One of our cocktails actually ended up
how
winning.
about the food?
Well, we're not allowed food, but yeah,
I had
the
to get
the
that in.
the
New
but
Jersey,
but the
please pay attention. We need to permit food in distilleries and breweries. They
yeah,
need to be able to have their own food. It brings in more revenue and will help us grow. Yeah, back to you. I just had to
exactly.
get that thing in at
Yeah,
the
yeah.
state.
but yeah, we amazing cocktails. One of our cocktails won Cocktail of the Year at the New York Cocktail Expo, actually beating a lot of New York bars, so they were a little mad about that. So like I mean, clearly we're doing a lot of really cool stuff between all of my experimentation on the distilling side, and then our bar program is, putting out cocktails like we have one this season called Goat Three Ways. It's using goat yogurt, goat milk, and goat powder
Oh,
and to make like this really cool
it's not easy,
and it's
guys.
using multiple different spirits, and it is a beautiful like clarified cocktail too. So it's like you're not getting like that all that creaminess, but you're utilizing all the ingredients anyway. And we're doing stuff like that. We're really experimental, cool things. So anybody listening, I mean, come by, you'll have a great time, and say hi to me, and maybe we'll I'll give you a little sample of something cool.
Guys, you gotta stop by Alex's distillery. Alex is probably the coolest distiller in New Jersey, if not the world. I just can't vouch for everyone else yet. You gotta stop by. 3BR is the space to be in. And government, if you're listening, let's get it. Let's get those restaurants up and cooking. Cause look, we can't even have Barstool come and do a review because you can't have pizza. So
Yeah,
this is just, it's
sure.
just not, guys, government, you gotta get it all together. All right, thank you so much, Alex, for coming on the show. Hope to have you back another time. This was definitely a lot of fun. Thank you, little guy, for making yourself present. You were not supposed to be home, but hey, here you are. And guys, we're not going to discuss what goes in his battle. Well, thank you, Alex.
Yeah, no, thank you so much.
One, hold on, you're with me.